I'm Sydney, 34, female. I live in a small, quiet condo on the outskirts of the city, a peaceful little world I've built for myself. By day, I'm a cybersecurity analyst, which is just a fancy way of saying I spend my hours untangling digital knots and finding needles in virtual haystacks. It's a good life, a stable one, but you wouldn't know it from the way my family talks about it. My story is about the day I finally decided to show them just how much my failure of a career was worth. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The air in my mother's house was always thick with the scent of pot roast and unspoken expectations. Every Sunday, I'd drive the 45 minutes from my quiet condo to her perfectly manicured suburban home, steeling myself for what had become a weekly ritual of quiet judgment. This Sunday was no different. My mother, Margaret, a former financial advisor who believed a person's worth could be read on a bank statement, was holding court at the head of the dining table. My younger brother, Ben, sat to her right, preening like a peacock. Ben was the golden child. At 31, he was a lawyer at a prestigious downtown firm, drove a car I couldn't pronounce, and had a fiancée who looked like she'd been sculpted from marble. He was everything my mother had ever wanted in a child, successful, visible, and wealthy. I, on the other hand, was the question mark, the stable one, the one with a nice little job that no one in the family really understood. Sydney, dear, my mother began, passing the gravy boat. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she only used when she was about to deliver a backhanded compliment or a thinly veiled criticism. Did you wear that to work? It's simple. I glanced down at my blouse. It was a perfectly professional silk top, but next to Ben's tailored suit, I suppose it looked plain. I work in a secure building, Mom. We're more focused on firewalls than fashion. Ben chuckled, a smug little sound that always set my teeth on edge. She means she works in a dark room with a bunch of nerds, Mom. Don't worry, we can't all be partners at a law firm by 30. The jab landed as intended. I tried to let it roll off my back, but the weight of these dinners was cumulative. Each little comment, each dismissive glance, added another stone to the pile I carried. Aunt Millie, my mother's sister and my only real ally at these gatherings, shot me a sympathetic look from across the table. She owned a small bakery in town and was therefore also considered quaint and unambitious by Margaret's standards. Being a lawyer isn't everything, Ben, Millie said gently, her hands smelling faintly of yeast and sugar. Sydney has a very important job. She protects people's information. My mother waved a dismissive hand. Oh, I'm sure it's fine. It's just not what I pictured for her. I had such high hopes, all that potential, and she chose to play with computers. The words stung, but I'd heard them so many times they'd become a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. I focused on my plate, cutting my pot roast into unnecessarily small pieces. The rest of the dinner followed the usual script. Ben would boast about a recent case he'd won, my mother would beam with pride, and I would offer bland, one-sentence answers about my week, which were usually met with polite disinterest. The message was always clear. Ben was the success, and I was the one who had settled. The dynamic between Ben and me was forged in childhood. He was the charming, outgoing one who could talk his way out of any trouble. I was the quiet, studious one who preferred books to people. Our mother, a woman who valued appearances above all else, naturally gravitated toward the son who brought home trophies and accolades. My straight A's were expected. His B-minuses were celebrated as a sign of his socially focused nature. This pattern continued into our adult lives. When Ben announced he was going to law school, my mother took out a second mortgage to help pay for it, calling it an investment in our family's future. When I got a full scholarship to study computer science, she'd simply nodded and said, "Well, that's practical, I suppose." After dinner, as I was helping Aunt Millie clear the table, the conversation in the dining room drifted into the kitchen. Ben was talking about his upcoming wedding, a lavish affair planned for a 5-star resort. The catering alone is going to cost a fortune, he said, his voice dripping with faux humility. But you only get married once, right? It will be the event of the season, my mother declared. We have to show people what this family is about. It's all about maintaining a standard. Her eyes flickered towards me as I walked back into the room. Sydney, are you bringing a date? It would be nice if you could at least look the part. I clenched my jaw. I'll be there, Mom. And your contribution to the gift, dear, she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. I know things are probably tight for you, but we were thinking everyone could pitch in for their honeymoon. A month-long trip to Italy. Ben deserves it. The implication was clear. I was the charity case who couldn't be expected to contribute much. It was the same story, different day. I was the reliable, responsible daughter who faded into the background, while Ben was the shining star for whom no expense was too great. I was the scapegoat for my mother's disappointment, the yardstick against which Ben's glorious success was measured. That night, as I drove home, the dull ache had sharpened into something else, something cold and hard. It was the beginning of a decision. The week after that dinner was busy. I dove into my work, immersing myself in lines of code and security protocols. It was a world where I had control, where logic reigned and things made sense. Unlike my family, a computer didn't judge you, it just executed commands. It was on a Thursday afternoon when something unusual caught my eye. I have alerts set up for all my family's accounts, not in an invasive way, but just to keep an eye out for scams, especially for my mother, who was prone to clicking on suspicious links. An email popped up with a subject line, "Payment overdue notice." It was for one of my mother's utility bills. This was strange. My mother was meticulous about her finances. She'd spent her entire career advising others on how to manage their money. Being late on a payment was completely out of character. I clicked open the email. It was a standard automated notice from the electric company. The amount wasn't huge, but it was the principle of the thing. Curious, I decided to log into her online banking portal to see what was going on. I had her credentials saved from a few years ago when I'd helped her set up online payments, and she'd insisted I keep them just in case. As I navigated to the payment history page, my brow furrowed. It wasn't just the electric bill. Her mortgage payment for the month was also late, so was her car payment. A small knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This was more than an oversight, this was a pattern. My mother, the woman who preached fiscal responsibility like it was gospel, was suddenly missing multiple payments. I started digging deeper, looking at her transaction history for the past few months. What I found made the knot in my stomach clench into a fist of ice. There were large, regular withdrawals, thousands of dollars every month, all sent to the same account. It wasn't a familiar account, not a creditor or a utility company. It was a transfer to a private investment account, an account I didn't recognize. My mind started racing. Was she being scammed? Had someone stolen her identity? I was about to pick up the phone and call her when I saw the name on the receiving account. It was Benjamin Carter, my brother. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. My mother was sending thousands of dollars to Ben every month. So much money, in fact, that she was falling behind on her own essential bills. The narrative my mother had so carefully crafted, of her golden boy son who was a high-flying legal eagle, began to crumble. My professional instincts kicked in, overriding the emotional shock. I started to do what I do best. I followed the digital breadcrumbs. I ran a check on the startup Ben claimed to be a founder of. It existed, but a quick search of public records showed it was barely solvent, drowning in debt and facing 2 lawsuits from disgruntled early investors. His social media, however, painted a picture of extravagant success. Photos of him on yachts, at exclusive clubs, wearing designer clothes. It was all a facade. Then, I turned my attention back to my mother's finances. I referenced the dates of her transfers to Ben with his social media posts. The transfer of $5,000 in July coincided with his spontaneous weekend trip to Aspen. The $10,000 she sent in September matched the down payment on the ridiculously expensive venue for his wedding. He wasn't just taking money from her, he was funding his entire fake lifestyle with her retirement savings. The more I dug, the uglier it got. My mother had cashed out a significant portion of her retirement portfolio, incurring massive tax penalties, all to fuel her son's delusions of grandeur. She was sacrificing her own financial security, the very thing she had built her identity around, to maintain the illusion that her son was a success and she was the proud mother of a winner, and she was letting him do it while simultaneously calling me a failure. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. She lectured me about my simple life and my practical job, all while her golden child was draining her life savings to play pretend. The anger that had been simmering for years began to boil. But it wasn't a hot, reckless anger. It was a cold, precise fury. I wasn't just going to call them out. I was going to do it in a way they would never forget. For the next 2 weeks, I worked methodically. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a cybersecurity analyst building a case, I downloaded every bank statement, every transfer confirmation, every email alert. I compiled a detailed spreadsheet, meticulously documenting every dollar my mother had sent to Ben over the past 2 years. The total was staggering, well over $100,000. I then went through my own financial records. A few years ago, when my father passed away, he had left a small inheritance directly to me with a note saying, "For your future. Don't let your mother manage it." At the time, I was hurt, but now I understood. He had seen the dynamic even back then. I had invested that money wisely. A portion of it, I realized, was being used for something my mother had no idea about. 2 years ago, her long-term care insurance policy had lapsed. The premiums had become too expensive, and she had been planning to cancel it. I knew how catastrophic it would be if she ever needed it, so I had quietly taken over the payments myself. I set up an automatic draft from a separate account she didn't know about. I was paying nearly $400 a month to protect her future, while her favorite son was stealing it. The final piece of my plan fell into place. I created a simple, elegant presentation, the kind you'd give in a corporate boardroom. It was clean, factual, and utterly damning. It had charts showing the depletion of her savings, timelines linking her transfers to Ben's expenditures, and copies of all the late notices for her bills. The last slide was a screenshot of my own bank account, showing the monthly payments for her insurance policy. I chose my moment carefully, the next family dinner. It was a special one, meant to celebrate Ben's engagement. His fiancée and her parents would be there. My mother was already buzzing with excitement about impressing her future in-laws. It was the perfect stage. I made copies of everything, placing them in a crisp manila envelope. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The atmosphere at dinner was even more charged than usual. Ben's fiancée, a woman named Amelia, was polite and polished. Her parents were the picture of old, money elegance. My mother was in her element, laughing too loudly and boasting about Ben's latest triumph in court. Ben soaked it all in, accepting the praise as if it were his birthright. They mostly ignored me, which was fine. I ate my meal in silence, waiting. The moment came during dessert. My mother raised her glass for a toast. "To my wonderful son, Ben," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "who has worked so hard to build a life for himself. He has made me so proud, proving that with ambition and drive, anything is possible. Unlike some people who choose to play it safe, he has reached for the stars." Her eyes met mine, a familiar flicker of disappointment in them. That was my cue. As everyone clinked their glasses, I remained seated. I gently cleared my throat. "I'd like to propose a toast as well," I said, my voice steady and clear. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. This was unusual. I never made toasts. "I'd like to toast to the truth," I said, looking directly at my mother and brother, "and to financial transparency." I reached down and pulled the manila envelope from my bag. I slid a packet across the table to my mother, one to Ben, and one to Amelia's father, who looked at it with mild curiosity. "Mom," I said, my voice losing its gentle edge and gaining a core of steel. "You called me a failure. You said I played it safe. You praised Ben for his ambition. I think it's time everyone at this table understood the true cost of that ambition." My mother's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Ben's face went pale. He knew. Amelia's father put on his reading glasses and began to leaf through the pages. The room was utterly silent except for the rustle of paper. I watched my mother's expression shift from confusion to disbelief and finally to horrified comprehension. Her eyes darted from the bank statements to Ben, who refused to look at her. "What is this, Sydney?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. "That," I replied, "is a record of the $117,452 you have given Ben over the past 24 months. It's also a record of the late fees you've been incurring on your mortgage because you've been sending him your bill money. He's been funding his entire life with your retirement savings. The car, vacations, this very engagement party, you paid for all of it." Amelia's father put the papers down, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at Ben, then at Amelia. I wasn't finished. I turned to the last page in my own packet. "And one more thing, Mom. While you were calling me a disappointment, I've been spending the last 2 years paying the premiums on your long-term care insurance, which you were about to lose. So while your successful son was draining your accounts, your failure of a daughter was making sure you wouldn't be left with nothing when you get older." The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken only by a small, choked sob from my mother. Ben just sat there, frozen, his golden boy image shattered into a million pieces. Amelia slowly slid her engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the table. I didn't stay for the fallout. I stood up, looked at my family for the last time, and said, "I think I'm done with Sunday dinners." Then I walked out. Aunt Millie called me the next day. She said Amelia and her parents left right after I did. The engagement was off. My mother had locked herself in her room, and Ben had finally been forced to admit everything. He'd lost his job months ago and had been living a lie ever since, too arrogant and ashamed to tell anyone, especially our mother. The weeks that followed were a blur of angry voicemails and pleading texts from both of them. I ignored them all. I needed space to process decades of being made to feel small. My mother's world, built on the fragile foundation of appearances, had collapsed. She had to sell her house, the one filled with so much judgment, and move into a smaller apartment. Ben had to face the consequences of his actions, legally and financially. It was about 6 months later when Aunt Millie invited me to her bakery for coffee. She told me my mother had been asking about me. She was in therapy, trying to understand how she had become so obsessed with the idea of success that she'd been willing to destroy her own future and sacrifice one child for the sake of another. I haven't seen my mother or brother since that night. I'm not sure if I ever will. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal, but something has changed in me. I no longer carry the weight of their expectations. My worth is not determined by their approval. I have my own life, my own career, and my own definition of success. It's a quiet life, a simple one, but it's mine, and for the first time, that feels like more than enough. My family is smaller now. It's really just me and Aunt Millie, but it's honest. And I've learned that a quiet truth is worth more than the loudest, most expensive lie.